Go ahead and get started. Really appreciate seeing all you warm bodies on such a nice warm day. Welcome to the workshop on Montana Media Beyond Access. The reason we're having this workshop this evening and what I was interested in doing with it was I realize here at MCAT we're developing a whole media literacy in the community, and that is giving folks access to equipment and having them tell their own stories and recreate their own visions for community television. What I feel we're not doing yet, and what I hope to begin doing, is discuss the broader picture of where does access fit in the Montana telecommunications arena, and what are some of the other options for distributing access programming, and what's some of the other programming coming to these access facilities. And then we also have the question, of course, of public television coming to town, and the University of Montana looks like it's taking the lead on that right now. We also have low-power television here in Montana, and they're quite a force and have become ever more so these last few years. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. What we're going to do is we'll have our two guests speak for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to the floor and ask questions. So I want to welcome you to MCAT. I'm glad to see you, and I'm going to begin by introducing our guests. The first is an old friend, both professional and otherwise, McCarthy Coyle, who is now a reporter and editor of The Independent, the weekly newspaper in Missoula. And we worked together for many years at MQTV, an organization that he founded. Right now, he's just recently heard the good news that he's received a grant from the Institute for Alternative Journalism to pursue investigative reporting about telecommunications in Montana. So, yeah. And he's mentioned to me tonight that he's going to talk about a little bit of the background of, the picture of telecommunications. And I'm also welcoming tonight Jim Parker, who's from BVTV, Bitterroot Valley Television, which is a low-power television station that's been in existence for a few years, operating out of Hamilton now. And he's also was involved in Access long before MCAT ever existed. He's Mr. Access from the Bitterroot Valley area. So we'd like to welcome Jim, too. So thanks for speaking. And we'll get started with McCarthy first.
Thanks, Mary. And Mary said, don't be nervous. And that was good. And Jim used some good words just before we got started about we have all this technology that we read about, having to do with all kinds of telecommunications. And the difficulty is where does the individual person fit into that picture, and where do they contribute to building a vision? The workshop notes that MCAT had prepared talked about, well, what about public television in Montana? And I think that a good way of looking at public television is to think of all television as being public. And then we can get into the little definitions of institutional public television. But we're using public television facilities right now here at MCAT. If we look at the commercial television stations in Montana, which are licensed for the most part to private sector entities, but they are licensed to serve in the public interest. So those too are public television. What was the other? And then we have what is more popularly known as public television, which we associate with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and Public Broadcasting Service. So that is what we would call institutionalized public television. So we've been struggling for a long time in Montana to establish that institutionalized public television. And as with most areas having to do with telecommunications, because you're having to do with the distribution of information. And almost everybody in the world wants to distribute information. Your neighbor does, and you do, and I do. And so the difficulty is, how do you distribute it? Now, here at MCAT is a good example of almost a gateless information pathway. There's no restrictions on basically on who can come in and say what about anything. So for now, in this country, I see it as perhaps the purest form of public television. Television ipso facto is controversial. And one of the key ingredients that gets hit on over the years by me and others is that public television in Montana, let's go back to the institutional portion of it, is a controversial issue of public importance. And for myself, as someone who's very interested in that institutionalized portion of of television, I don't have enough information about it, about who's doing what and how they're doing it, and where's the money coming from, things like this. So I see that as a problem in our participating in developing a vision of what public television could be, might be, should be. I have heard almost nothing, and I'm sure that there have been programs or news bites on radio and television, whether that is commercial or whether that is public radio and television in Montana. I'm sure there are some news bites that I have missed. But over these many years, I have heard myself, and from other people, I haven't heard from other people who have heard anything about who's doing what about public television in Montana. I don't hear about it on Montana Public Radio. I'm not informed by Montana Public Radio as to what's going on in Montana Public Television. So number one, I see a major responsibility not being met by present telecommunications providers. I mean, how do we know where and when to jump in or who to talk to if we're not finding out about it on the news and public affairs shows? Now, curiously, last night, and many of you may have heard that on KUFM on the local news, I heard this business about the grazing show and Senator Burns putting a hold on Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding because of his concern about a program that was on last fall about grazing and the stock growers industry throughout the country. Apparently were very concerned about this show, were angry about it, and then I heard that Montana Public Television, in response to the concern, had apparently previewed this program and ran a response on Montana Public Television because they saw this as being, I guess Montana Public Television saw this program as being perhaps lacking in balance. So they made the decision to go ahead and provide some counter-programming. Well, I think Montana Public Television should be aware that there's an awful lot of programming that is considered out of balance by many of us. So at what point are you able to intervene and participate in the process of Montana Public Television to affect the decisions as to what gets shown, when, by whom, and as to what gets censored, and what's the process by which it gets censored? I mean, these are very, very dangerous areas, and I think that the Montana public has to take and has to be given a greater opportunity, a ready opportunity, to participate in developing a vision for what Montana institutional public television should be. Jim will be speaking about low power stations. There's a lot of controversy going on about low power. There are rumors about what the institutions want to do or don't want to do to incorporate the low power television stations throughout Montana into their system. What are the opportunities there for the public to participate in that discussion? What about independent producers working in Montana? A letter I had a couple of months ago, back in January, from Marilyn Wessel, who's associated with public television down at Montana State University, referred to that at some future time, when the statewide system is up and running and has a balanced budget, that at that point they would talk about an independent production fund. Well, what does that mean? I mean, a statewide system up and running? What does that mean? 1999? I mean, and what portion, I mean, of this Montana public television budget will be available to independent producers? I mean, I think it's important that the independent producers make their case now that it's not for Montana public television to decide, you know, this is the date, this is how much that's going to be available. They need to be, the institutions need to be talking actively on a regular basis with independent producers to find out what our needs are and what our budgetary needs are and how much time we think is appropriate for us to be on the air. We need to find out from Montana Public Television at the institutions how many programs of theirs they're going to make available. Let's say, what's the opportunities for cooperating with public access channels? The universities produce many programs, but how often are they seen on public access channels in Montana? Isn't there an opportunity there for cooperation? Isn't that what we call networking? Is there enough going on? Right now, I don't see that networking happening. Just a couple of news bites. Now, Telecommunications Incorporated, TCI, which is, as many of you know, the largest cable company in the United States and therefore, I guess, in the world, and they control 90% of the Montana outlets. And back in the '89 legislature, there was a property tax relief bill passed in a special session which had to do with when the legislature was trying to deal with school equalization, you know, rich districts, poor districts. And in that session of the legislature, there was major tax relief provided to the cable industry and to radio and television broadcasters. That tax relief amounted to a 44% in actual tax dollars collected, a drop of 44%. Now, that really comes out of the localities. In other words, those dollars are taken away from the cities and the communities, you know, as opposed to the state, because those tax monies were local taxes collected. So that's a 44% drop here in Missoula, for example, as an example. Now, what could we be doing with that money? You know, maybe it's 50 grand or 60 grand. That's equipment. That's programming money. Okay, in the same year, in 1989, the legislature set up MetNet, which is the Educational Television Computers Cooperative. And the legislature said, well, we'll call for 300 grand over the biennium if we get a donation from the private sector or a donation from somewhere, right? So who stepped up to the plate with a donation but TCI? Well, that's an interesting quid quo pro. They got a tax break of about $300,000, which is permanent, and then they paid for that. They easily paid for their $300,000 quote donation to the state of Montana with the tax break that they got. Then they go to the federal government and take a deduction for the quote donation that they gave to the state of Montana. Anyway, enough about that. But I think that the institutions need to be very careful about their dealings with the private sector in this regard. And I don't know enough about that as an individual producer, television producer, and as a reporter. I want to know more about that. I think that we have to be very careful when the private sector is working so closely with the institutions. I think that that's an area to be looked out for. And I think we're about ready to turn it over to Jim. I wanted to hit on some of the highlights. Just check my notes here. Thanks. The impression one gets, I'll take a break at this point. The impression one gets is that the institutions in the state of Montana, and we, by the way, in the state of Montana over the last 15 years have spent over $500,000 in different planning studies, tax money and tax dollars, in order to, arrive at some final plan for what the telecommunications, the system is going to serve the state of Montana. And one perspective on the use of those monies, some of which were federal and some of which were state and some of which were a mix, is that like a lot of planning monies and planning studies, they are designed to support the vision and the expectation that the institutions already have as to what they want to accomplish. So that the money is spent and the plan is developed by a corporation, in this case one from California came up and assisted in some studies, and came up with a document that would reflect the aspirations of the bureaucratic institutions themselves. And so that's an area of concern. But one, I think, can come away fairly with the impression that the institutions in the state of Montana would prefer to think that that public television is not a controversial issue of public importance. That if we would just trust them, leave them to their own devices, that they will serve us well, and it is not to worry. And I think that they tend to tamp down controversy. They don't welcome it. And, controversy is a hard thing to deal with. It's not always pleasant. But I think the bottom line is for what that I know less than I wish to know. And that getting information from the institutions is a very difficult thing to do. And I wrote to MSU back in January with a long list of very specific questions, and I've had no response to that letter. And so I called up the Freedom of Press hotline to find out, well, how can I get information from a public institution? So I got the advice, and I followed up on it. Enough for now. Thanks.
First, I think I'd like to begin. I'm very complimented by Mary's reference to me as Mr. Access. And I'll take this opportunity just a moment to, I'm not Mr. Access. There's a person that recruited me into this that I regard as Mr. Access, and I'll talk about, maybe do a little oral history about parts of BVTV's history that are important to me, at least. But I think in terms of trying to link this to what McCarthy has just said, one of the things that I was kind of counting on him to supply was the background, in a longer vision background of public television in Montana. And because many of you may not be long-term residents, I think it's important to keep that in mind, and I always try to keep it in mind in dealing with the topic of telecommunications, because I think that explains part of the reason that our public, in terms of the citizenry, are really illiterate when it comes to telecommunications. And that goes back nearly 30 years. It'll be 30 years in 1995, when the effort to bring Montana into, at that time, which I think we were one of 3 or 4 states without a public television station system in the state, broke down because of a scandal. There were lots of very dedicated and creative, intelligent people involved in the effort to bring us, this state, into the group of states that did have public television. And it's been nearly, as I say, 30 years, and we still don't have a public television system. And that's why I welcome, personally, the effort to bring about, in whether or not it's happening behind closed doors or with enough public participation or not. I think that we can get into that issue later. But it's very important to remember that Montana is a place without the human infrastructure to deal with many of these issues. We just don't know about it because we haven't had public television. We are not able, it's very hard to transfer technologies into Montana that are taken for granted in other states. And in many ways, I think that you could, as a historian of technology, go back and make a case that part of the doldrums that we face economically can be traced to the fact that we're very backward in terms of the adoption of new information technologies. It's not to say that there aren't excellent practitioners here. We have lots of good independent producers. We have what most people consider around the United States an outstanding public radio system. When you take KUFM and KEMC, is that the right name, Gus? Together, we do have an excellent public radio system. And if you go back even further into the 40s, there are roots of all of that if you look at it historically. But the important thing to remember is that we have been denied, we haven't had paid public people who are real engineers, who are producers, who are marketers involved in public television as any other state. I think we're one of the 2 states without a public television system in the United States now. Is that right, or are we the only one? We are probably the last, we're the last best place without a public television system, okay? So in terms of my own involvement with public television, with the media, with trying to communicate, I think I dabbled around in it in the 70s. I was involved in the war on poverty. I'm a retired poverty warrior. I have been since 1980. We used Sony Portapacks to document nutrition education activities, to go to meetings, whether we had tape in the machine or not, and use that as a way of training people, of developing leaders who spoke to issues. Many of you who are Missoula residents may remember LIGHT, Low Income Group for Human Treatment, and many of the confrontations we had with people like Charles Huntley, who was the health director at the time. And we videotaped all of that, and we went back and people looked at those videotapes, and they learned a great deal. They learned how to better communicate themselves what it was that they wanted, which was health care for their children, to people who many times were insensitive. And through that process, I learned about how powerful communication technologies can be and how that can contribute to building a better quality of life in a community and building community. And that's why I am very pleased that a place like MCAT has come to be, and the citizens of Missoula need to support an institution like MCAT. It's not only important to be entertained by television, it's important to have television as a way of communicating with other people amongst yourself. And that's a very important part of the inspiration for Bitterroot Valley Public Television. Its history, and as I said, that goes back to a person that retired to the Bitterroot in the late 1970s, a fellow named Leighton Jones. And people who know Leighton will know what I mean. He was an educator. He was a Montanan first. He was born in Deer Lodge, educated here at the University of Montana, and went off to teach in California in the California school system. California, of course, had public television when he arrived. They developed a local, educationally based public television system in the school system he worked for their community, and did lots of access work for 25 years, and retired to the Bitterroot and found out that public television hadn't come to Montana yet. So what did he do about it? He went to the cable company, which at that time wasn't TCI. It was an independent cable company that was later acquired by Group W, and Group W then was acquired by TCI, in terms of what we've seen happen through the 1980s in terms of the concentration of economic concentration that's gone on in the communication industry. But he went and said, okay, I will buy the equipment, the kinds of, at that time, the kinds of equipment you have here at MCAT, and we will have a cable access station in Hamilton. He did that. oftentimes paying student camera people out of his own pocket. He went out and developed advertisers among the local business people and developed a strong cable access in the sense that you have it here in Missoula now in 1978 and 1979. So he is and will be remembered as a real pioneer in this whole area in Montana. I am not a television consumer. I don't watch television. I listen to public radio. Always have. Since Bob Haney and Terry Robinson were there with the 25-watt station. I lived over on Evans Avenue and could listen in and call them up and tell them how they were coming in. Some nights they didn't even, it was hard to get good reception then. But I did move back to the Bitterroot in 1983. I had done lots of grant work, I'd done lots of community work, lots of training, and I had done some media production using, as I said earlier, half-inch kinds of equipment. Leighton had some children who were in Honduras, and he was very concerned. If you remember at that time, it looked like El Salvador was going to spill over into Honduras. And he said, Jim, I want to go down there, but if I leave, and I can't even remember the name of the cable company. Teleprompter will take the access station away, and I've got to have somebody to take it over. Mrs. Leighton, I don't like television. I don't even watch it. I don't know anything about it in terms of, oh, I know you can do it, Jim. And I said, well, I'll think about it. Well, that was my mistake there, because soon after that, my brother sold my grandfather's farm, and that meant that because he sold it, I had to get a share of the inheritance. My grandfather had passed away. Leighton came back and bugged me again, and I says, well, I'll talk to my wife about it. So we went up to Glogly Hot Springs at Thanksgiving. He was going to leave like the 10th of December, and we talked it over, and he says, well, the other things that we'd planned to do that year we couldn't do, and we did have the money, and I says, well, let's do it. So on December 2nd, we put on our first cable, 1983, our first cable access program with the equipment we bought from Grandpa Mitch's farm. We went on and did that. We produced well over 100 two-hour shows, 2 hours of original material a week. We'd try to get as many people on television as possible because that was how you got advertisers to pay for it. It was funded by advertisers in terms of it paid for the cost of the tapes and the gasoline, that sort of thing. Unbeknownst to me, Leighton had also started the effort to bring what became Bitterroot Valley Public Television to the Bitterroot. I didn't know anything about low-power television technology when Leighton left, handed over the keys to his studio, which kind of looked, it was in his basement, but it kind of looked like our environs now. And we decided to move the studio or the function down to our basement because we didn't like to drive up to Leighton's house, which is up on top of a ridge. And we did that. In the process of moving some of the stuff, I came across a grant application for what was called the Bitterroot Valley Electric Television Cooperative. If you remember the early 80s when Reagan first won, there was a tremendous backlash against anything that sounded socialist at all. And cooperative certainly sounded socialist, and that application had been rejected. I was interested in the application because it did contain this idea about a technology that had come from Dan Tone and Lee Good, who were at that time young people. They just graduated from MSU in electrical engineering and media in 1978, and they had figured out how to create a robot that could bring public television to rural communities in the Rocky Mountains, partly springing again from the way that public television had been quashed. They, of course, when they had enrolled probably in those curriculums, had thought that they could go on and be engineers in a public television system. Well, the rug was, through this scandal, which I'm sure McCarthy can talk to us about later, the rug was pulled out from under them. But they persevered like good Montanans and figured out a way that it could happen anyway. And it depended on people in communities getting together and proposing this to the federal government. It was technically feasible. So we just basically took that application, revised it, incorporated a new group called Bitterroot Valley Public Television. Leighton was gone. I made him vice president. I made my wife president. I was the secretary treasurer, and submitted the application. We did not have, it turned out, when they reviewed the application, we didn't not have a very important thing. And this is another, telecommunications is regulated, whatever. I mean, it is the public, and it is regulated, and that's what happens. We didn't have the right permits. So that one was turned down in 1984. But we did then take it back, and the whole idea of having a television station that would be independent of the cable, that would broadcast through the air, that would just be for the people in the Bitterroot Valley, that they could use to communicate with one another in a way that Leighton had taught people it worked. I mean, he taught people that this was an important part of their life through the cable system. We did it again in '85. That time, we failed to, and this is a totally volunteer effort. We'd failed to respond to the determination letter from the IRS that we needed to respond to so that we achieved full-fledged nonprofit 503 status. For that reason, we had the construction permit then, but because we weren't eligible for an IRS exemption, no go. So we do it again in 1986, and we're successful. At that time, the group of people that were involved in this had grown to include 30 or 40 pretty hardcore people that were caught by this vision. And Bonnie Evans, who many of you may know, agreed to take over as chairman, and she did a masterful job of raising the money that we needed to capitalize the station. We did receive a grant for $165,000. A lot of people credit me with having had the vision to include a pretty big, and it's actually larger than what Flathead County, or Flathead Community College is asking for in their application this year of local production equipment. And that has always been a part of our vision, is that they are the public airways, and we should use them to communicate with ourselves about things that are just important to us. It may not be of interest to you at all that the Corvallis Grange is having a bean feed to raise money for their scholarship fund, and that Millie Donut is in charge of it. But it's very important to us in the Bitterroot. Those are things that we do, and we use the media in that way so that we all know about it, or at least those that tune in. BVTV went on the air in 1988, in August of '88. In August of this year will be our 4th anniversary. We have more underwriters right now, I think, than KUFM. I think we're up to about 130. We have nearly 800 dues-paying members. If you take the NC Corporation for Public Broadcasting figures, that would mean that we have 8,000 viewers, which in a county of 25,000 people isn't bad, particularly given the nature of our technology. And I hope we can get into this for people that want to know about low-power television. There's a lot that I can talk about there in terms of what it is. But basically, it's an FM transmitter that's a line-of-sight technology. It's not well suited to the topography of western Montana. It's difficult to get the signal if there's anything in the way. And if you've got lots of little ridges, it makes it, it's remarkable to me that we may have that many viewers. Rating companies began to notice this about 2 years ago, and they can call us up to ask us who we are. That they didn't know that we existed, but that we do have, they think, between 20 and 35% of the people that watch us at some time during the week, which is surprising to me. So it is successful. There is a market for the kinds of things that Missoula Cable Access Television is doing, that kind of local communication. in order to deal with that, we've put up a second translator near Corvallis that boosts our signal to the middle part of the valley, and in the next 12 to 14 months, we plan on putting one up near Florence so that we have a complete system. Beyond that, the last bastion of the Bitterroot that doesn't receive the cleansing value. One of my jokes is that there's nothing wrong with the Bitterroot Valley, that watching enough of the right kind of television won't cure. But there are some people up in the East Fork and the West Fork, because of terrain, that won't be able to get it even with what we've got in place. So we'll work to put a fourth translator at Sula. There's just so much about this system that I think we can cover later. And I'm not. They don't have it sent. They should have a wrestling clock here to tell me how long I've talked. Other things about Bitterroot Valley Public Television, our budget, about 40% of it is paid for by the underwriters. About 20 to 25% is paid for by the members. The remainder, a portion of the cable franchise fees at Hamilton goes to the station, about $2,500 a year. And the remainder is made up of production fees. We rent our equipment to independent producers who use it to produce things on a contract basis normally. And then that's income. Sometimes we take grants directly to produce things as a volunteer team. How we're organized, and this has been great delight to me, McCarthy, my background is in philosophy, and one of the people that was very impressive to me as a young person, and I'll say it 30 years ago, maybe even longer than that, but that almost 30 years ago, was Ortega y Gasset. And he talked about the origin of government being in sport, in a real seminal sort of essay. And I went back and read that some time ago, or not, 4 or 5 months ago, I guess it was at Christmas. And I found out I wasn't nearly as impressed with it today, but I think that that's a real key thing, is that we've found that television is a team sport. When we do live fundraiser, when you get out in the field gathering things, with all of this technology, there's really no way that one person can run it all, as Mary is doing and Lori are doing tonight, and do as much as you want to do. If you can have 4 or 5 people on the team, and sometimes when we have the whole studio running, we'll have 10 or 11 people there. And it is a real sport. You do get into the sense of it being a team. And I think that once this finally does come to Montana, these technologies, that we'll find that it will have impact on government because of that we'll find that kids in schools want to become parts of production teams to communicate what they want to communicate. Our production team itself is made up primarily of professionals who want to use video to communicate something very important about their profession. We have biologists, we have artists, we have other people that are involved in producing, and they are very excited about becoming literate in this technology and using it as a tool to explain something, to advance ideas that they have. And that's at the heart of what keeps me in it, I think, because I really think that BVTV, and I tell our board this probably once a quarter, is the most exciting adult education project in the United States. That not only do we do adult education by rebroadcasting PBS, we do adult education by learning how to make our own television and by involving people in the process of learning about how television is made. So, Mary, I can see that...
Well, I just want to pass the
Sure.
mic on down to me. I was hoping that Lynn Merrick would come from Bozeman, and she has. And she's an independent producer, a filmmaker who has just gone through the process of finishing her film in the last couple of years, a film, one of her most recent, and has then gone through the process of trying to distribute that over PBS and access stations, and I think some low power stations. And I've asked her to come up so that we'd all be able to hear her story, both the audience here and the audience in TV land. And so she's going to come up and sit with you all for a few minutes and tell her story. And her film is called A Stack of Black Cats, and it was the 1990 winner for the Montana Film and Video Festival.
Second place.
Second place.
Documentary,
Oh,
yeah.
well, shoot. That was me at work. And she's also been recognized in a number of other ways for the film as well, and she might tell you about that. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry I was late. I don't know what I missed that you said, but and also Mary just handed me a note to ask me to do this, so I'm just trying to remember this whole process because I've been struggling with KUSM for a year and a half now to get my film shown. And
That's Bozeman Public.
yeah, one time I finally got it shown 1 year after I had tried to distribute it or get it shown, through KUSM. I'm getting ready to send a letter statewide about the whole process because I think in a sense I could use my situation as a test case for the fact that they need to speak to the fact there needs to be a policy for how they're going to handle independent producers and their work. And and I have it documented at home, but I'm just kind of want to tell you a little bit about that, what has happened with that. And the other thing that bothers me is I see them quoted everywhere, especially Jack Hippa, about how a large part of their plea for that they need all this power is how they're going to help us out. And I mean, I'm just really pretty livid at this point with how I've been treated. And
Excuse me, Lynn. Jack Hippa is the station manager at KUSM Bozeman.
so I did meet with him 1 year after I had given a tape to Ron Jetson as the program director, who I've been told by several different people, including him, he decides what gets programmed individually. He is the only person. The Friends of KUSM do not make programming decisions. I mean, I've heard that from more than several people, but they're quoted, I think, in the Independent that issue that they are involved in programming decisions. And I've seen that in the Chronicle in Bozeman, too, and that's just not true. I think they're pretty much a fundraising arm. So that really concerns me, that this one person makes all these decisions. Plus, there are a lot of other things I've encountered, like making phone calls about certain programs, like a Live from Off Center we'll get 1 week, we won't get it for another 3 months. And it's because people who answer the phone will say, give out information like, well, Ron didn't like that program. They had to edit it first, or it had frontal nudity, so he canceled one series a couple years ago, didn't show anything in it. And those kinds of things are just really upsetting to me because there's a large community in Bozeman of people that want to see this and send money to them, and that's censorship. And this is the kind of thing that I get upset about when you say that, how can we get this information? And living in Bozeman, I just see this kind of stuff go on that is just so dangerous, I think. But it's not documented, and it's really something that needs to be put into some sort of formalization and documented. But anyway, in my own case, I was just treated so rudely, literally told by, and this was after I had gotten some awards. I had distributed for probably a year and a half. And took the cassette to KUSM, and so they just sat on it for about 4 months, and then finally I went back and really treated rudely by Ron Jetson, which at this point I don't mind mentioning these people because they're who controls it. And he just said, I don't have time to watch that, Lynn. You can give me a half-inch cassette and maybe I'll watch it at home, but I really don't have time to do this. And so I just said, well, what is this about showing independent work? And they just show stuff that's produced by their students. So then I got that award at the Montana Film Festival. The next time I saw him, he was just real friendly and good show, but nothing about programming it. So finally, I guess it was August. When did they show it? August of this year, and I wrote Jack Hippa a card, and I just said, Ron has had this cassette for a year. Can't something happen? Why can't I have my tape shown? And not to mention the fact I don't think it should be his personal preference whether he likes my film or not, but just within the larger context of independent production. it should be shown. And so 2 days later, Ron called me and said he'd scheduled it, which to me is too coincidental, but they said it wasn't, that it takes a long time to schedule. So I wonder about that. Anyway, so it was shown one night, and then it led to some things for me. I mean, people calling me, and they said, you know, I tried to call KUSM, and I was basically hung up on. I was treated rudely. I couldn't get your name from anyone, so a secretary gave it to me. I just want to call you and tell you what I think about it, and which was really wonderful for me to hear that. And that was another upsetting thing, that KUSM wouldn't care about that or try to help, you know. I mean, if they want to respond to a person who showed something on the air, I think that they, at the very least, they shouldn't be rude to them. And so, and then I've had people ask me, several people ask me, and people where the film was shown, they want to see it again. And it's upsetting that is not accessible to me and to people who actually ask me about it, and could I see it again? And so now I'm just saying, this is a problem. I've had this problem with KUSM, and they won't rerun it. And they rerun their stuff countless times, even though I talked to HIPAA about that, and he said they don't. They show it once, which is just plain not true. I don't know why. I'm sorry. Marilyn Wessel had told one instructor that had asked me when he could see my tape, and he decided to pursue that. So he talked to Marilyn Wessel, and he said, why don't you go talk to Marilyn? But I've done that before, too, with other things, and I don't find that it goes anywhere, that a lot of power, there's a certain power thing there with that, she being sort of the PR person for keeping the power structure of KUSM intact, and I've always just found nothing happens through that. So anyway, I'm just really, that turned me into an activist about the larger concerns, and a lot of people in Bozeman saying the same thing, and some people, because of my experience, that this affects a lot of people. The way these decisions are made is just not right. There's no process in place. And so my own experience is, to me, real. It's important to document it, because that's just not right. And it's really scary if KUSM is going to get control of the whole state, and that's the way decisions are going to get made. So.
I'd like to respond. I'm sure everybody would like to jump in here, and I would just, but some of the things that Jim said and Lynn, I did want to. And since Lynn was speaking in a very personal way and as a professional, I will say this, that in my own experience here in many years ago when I first got started in my work as an activist in the media, I was with other organizations, and when Montanans for Quality Television was first getting organized, we intervened on a licensing matter here in Missoula, and that was with KECI, and they were newcomers to Montana, and they wanted to take the license. The station was for sale. And MQTV successfully intervened before the Federal Communications Commission and won some small but important things for the community, having to do with intern program for Native Americans at the station there, an increase in their public affairs programming, etc. But I think it would be fair to say that this ruckus was not welcomed at all within the commercial broadcasting field. And while I think that I have something of a track record and some credentials in the field of telecommunications, I have not been seen on television, that is to say, aside from cable access. My face has not been seen on a local television station in Missoula in about a dozen years, no matter what I've had to say about anything. So I think that the gates close very strongly if you make too much noise. And so I don't want to dwell on that, but it's an important point. I mean, in other words, you can sometimes hear someone like Lynn or myself talk, and it's very real what can happen if you, just beat on the door too strongly. They just shut you out. And that happens much more, I think, in telecommunications because the gatekeepers are very protective when it comes to high technology and their professionalism and their understanding and knowledge of what is good and what is bad and what's appropriate. But before we maybe launch into, more folks inputting, for example, what about there's such a thing as joint licensing. If we're talking about public television in Montana, you can have a joint license between a university and a community. Now that's, that never gets pursued. It's come up before. It could happen here in Missoula, but that idea has gone nowhere. It doesn't even get discussed in terms of the community and the university holding a joint license for a, public broadcasting station. They talk about, well, we have limited facilities. Finally, after all these years, I see that the local commercial TV stations in Missoula have gone to, all-night broadcasting. What's to stop something that we call Montana Public Television from being a 24-hour-a-day operation? I mean, the easy answer might be, well, we don't have the staff, it costs a lot of money, et cetera. But there's always this attitude of, I would respond by saying, would you please have a discussion about what can be done rather than what can't be done? If people say, well, we have a limited schedule because we got the PBS schedule and then we got the local this and the local that, extending the broadcast day until 3 o'clock in the morning is certainly a rational solution to maybe get some local producers on board and seen around the state. I think that there have been, in my estimation and experience, some problems with grants pursued by the universities, looking for special preference from the federal government in asking for these monies for the production of programming, for the acquisition of equipment. So they got the federal tax dollar because they said, we want a special preference because women and minorities are going to be very important in this process. And not only that, but again, this is through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration within the Department of Commerce, which distributes the hardware to public facilities. That agency is not allowed to distribute money to acquire equipment unless the applicant, in this case, be it MSU or U of M or any of us, unless we can say we have the means to distribute it, the programming that we're going to produce with this equipment, electronically. So in the case of the University of Montana many years ago, they said, you bet. This was long before MCAT. They said, we have a direct link with the cable system in Missoula. We're going to get this equipment. There's going to be programming with, for, by, and about women and Native Americans, particularly, and it's going to be distributed over the cable. Well, I don't know how much of that was done. I think very little. If we look at a technological vision, just to throw this out, Senator Burns is very interested in fiber optics, and a lot of people are interested in fiber optics. Can we take a quantum leap in a vision for Montana? And can we say, and stop maybe having these rather limited discussions or no discussions at all about community participation in public broadcasting, and can we talk about becoming a pilot state for, a total immersion telecommunication system, whether that's cable, the universities, the public schools, and yes, maybe at least talk about using telephone lines, so that we get universal service to everyone in Montana. They say, well, we got these problems because we got to get the relay stations and the transmitters, and we got to get money for this, and then we got to get a full power, and then we got a low power. Maybe we could get really bold and suggest to the delegation to advance the idea that we do become a pilot and look at some rather innovative solutions to telecommunications and not do it piecemeal. And while they're at it, tell the Congress that we are 30 years late on our public television system, so how about making a one-time catch-up appropriation of, say, $30 million so that we can get the equal treatment that the rest of the country has. Universal service. We got political campaigning. This is a big year this year. I mean, politics go on every year. One of the things that Congress worries about and gets argued about in political campaign reform bills is, how about discounts for advertising for candidates? Because television takes up so much money for campaigning. Well, what if Montana Public Radio and Montana Public Television and all the low powers and all the cable outlets in Montana says, okay, guys, this year we're going to provide you with the time that you need so that you don't have to buy, $500,000 worth, of TV spots here. You'll only have to buy $75,000 worth because we know you still want to get your 30-second spot on, KECI or KPAX, etc. But we'll make up the rest because we're public and because we're serving the public and because you want to reach the public, right? So then we can cut down on your budget and you don't have to raise so much money. This kind of thing does not get discussed. And I'm not limiting that to Montana. It gets discussed very little. But we have the opportunity to be innovative if someone wants to be innovative with us, including institutional public television, public access, low power, whatever. Video production. I remember being able to take a nice hit on Senator Pell years ago. He was looking for, I think it was more money. His baby at that time, or one of his babies, has been the NEH or the NEA or both of the above, and television, etc. And they were trying to put the cut on some funding on, one of the arts projects, and Pell said, I think it was just 79 or 80. Because I was back in Washington when this happened. And he said, but we need this money for the Great Books program, among other things. He said, if you're out in Montana, he said, those people sit around in the winter and read the great books. And it was a, worthwhile and charming expression. And I said at the time publicly, not only do we read the great books, but we write them, right? And we do write them. And there's another message for Montana Public Television and public access. This access station, which is the one I'm most familiar with, and as I move around Montana, meet writers, meet performers, meet video editors, we are a very exciting place with our talents. Now, what interest does Montana Public Television have in working with us to produce programs, to distribute nationally, to sell nationally, and to make some money in the process? Is there that open door? Where is the creativity on the other end, on the institutional end? We don't get it. We don't get a sense of movement, of talk, of a willingness to be open and say, you bet, come on in. It's always, how much money you got?